On October 30th, 2005, something incredible happened. In Redmond, Washington, one of the world's richest and most powerful businessmen sent an urgent memo to his top engineers and most trusted managers. It sounded the alarm that a very disruptive wave was about to wash over the entire world, forever changing the way we get information and do business. It also warned that this would wipe out the $200 billion business empire he'd spent his life building. Meanwhile, a few hundred miles south, on the banks of the Columbia River, a mysterious outfit known only as Design LLC quietly constructed two massive windowless warehouses. This mammoth undertaking was codenamed Project 2, and the International Herald Tribune described the towering monolithic structures as looming like an information-age nuclear plant. I realize this may sound like something out of a Tom Clancy novel, but I think you'll want to bear with me, because analysts estimate this wave has grown into a $160 billion tsunami, and experts say it's going to upend a $1 trillion industry. Yet very few investors understand just how huge it's going to be. And if you have a few minutes to get the full story so you can decide for yourself, you could soon be front and center when the big money starts rolling in. But I warn you, the smart money is already on the move. In fact, as you're about to discover, a small group of ultra-successful investors who are beating the market by a 33% point margin are quietly positioning themselves to cash in on this incredible economic shift right this minute. And soon, tens of thousands will be rushing to join them. That's because what I'm about to reveal to you is without a doubt one of the most lucrative investment opportunities we'll ever encounter. This story is so big that we have to step clear back to February 28, 1881 to put it into perspective. On that chilly winter night, a 21-year-old British stenographer named Samuel Insull arrived in New York aboard the City of Chester. Thomas Edison's chief engineer had lured him to America to serve as Edison's private secretary. 11 years later, Insull oversaw the merger that created General Electric, and shortly thereafter was offered the presidency of the Chicago Edison Company. Little did anyone know, the world of electricity was about to drastically change. At the time, cities like Chicago had dozens of small, privately owned power stations transmitting direct current, DC, electricity to neighborhoods within a small radius. With due respect to Edison, Insull knew that the model Edison had created was flawed. So, he set out to transform Edison's legacy into something far greater and more efficient than its creator had ever imagined. In doing so, he forever changed the world. You see, Insull realized that if you could create a utility by building giant central power stations that would transmit alternating current AC electricity over great distances, these power stations could be linked to form a giant grid that would serve homes, businesses, and industries in even the most remote locations. And once electricity was readily available everywhere, more and more electric power devices would come to market, creating more and more demand for the electricity that utilities produced. And here's the kicker. Because these utilities could match supply with demand, realize superior economies of scale, and use their generating capacity much more efficiently, they could deliver electricity for a fraction of what it cost people to produce it on their own. And Insull was right on the money. By 1907, utilities produced 40% of the power in the US. In 1920, that number stood at 70%, and a decade later, it was over 90%. And what was once unimaginable had suddenly become total reality. Now, history is repeating itself, and it could make you rich. You see, 118 years later after Insull came up with the idea for utility, this breakthrough technology has morphed and been reapplied to the world of computers. And now the next great technological revolution is underway. And one of the most successful investors I've ever met is convinced that this technological shift will dump millions of dollars into the portfolios of investors just like you. But in order to claim your fair share of the wealth, you have to know who the dominant players are, and you have to get invested now. That's why I want to introduce you to this legendary investor and tell you about 3 companies he's identified as top dogs and first movers in the breakout industry. These are 3 companies he believes will dominate their industry over the next 5 to 10 years and hand investors like you life-changing wealth along the way. I'll also reveal the 6 traits he looked for in a growth stock and explain how they have led him directly to stocks that have soared 321%, 323%, 397%, 570%, and even 928% in just the last 5 years. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about this amazing technology and why, once again, the unimaginable is fast becoming a reality. You might remember when computers took up entire rooms and were once used by companies that needed to do intense mathematical calculations. That all changed when Intel unveiled the microprocessor and a geeky college dropout started writing software with his former high school pal. Thanks to the virtual desktop they developed, the PC quickly replaced the mainframe as the center of corporate computing and began showing up in homes across America. Before long, companies began building intra-office networks so that their employees could run programs like Microsoft Word and Excel on their PCs, and also access programs, files, and printers from a central server. But, like Edison's, this model was far from perfect. Due to a lack of standards in computing hardware and software, competing products were rarely compatible, making PC networks far more inefficient than their mainframe predecessors. In fact, most servers ended up being used as single-purpose machines that ran a single software application or database. And every time a company needed to add a new application, it was forced to expand its data centers, replace or reprogram old systems, and hire IT technicians to keep everything running. As a result, global IT spending jumped from under $100 billion per year in the early 1970s to over $1 trillion per year by the turn of the century. Here's the dirty little secret behind this mind-boggling growth, and the two words that will put an end to the party. IT consulting firm IDC reports that every dollar a company spends on a Microsoft product results in an additional $8 of IT expenses. And one IT expert admits trillions of dollars that companies have invested into information technology have gone to waste. Yet, because of the stranglehold Microsoft had on the computer industry, companies have had no choice but to run these obscenely expensive and highly inefficient networks. But that's all about to change. And that's precisely why the two words, cloud computing, scare the hell out of Bill Gates. You see, he realizes that thanks to the thousands of miles of fiber optic cable laid during the late 1990s, the speed of computer networks has finally caught up to the speed of computer processors. To quote IT expert Nicholas Carr, what the fiber optic internet does for computing is exactly what the alternating current network did for electricity. And suddenly, computers that were once incompatible and isolated are now linked in a giant network, or cloud. As a result, computing is fast becoming a utility in much the same way that electricity did, which is why even Bill Gates has openly admitted that the next sea change is upon us. To see what he means, just think back a few years. If you wanted to type a letter, create a spreadsheet, edit a photo, or play a game, you had to go to the store, buy the software, and install it on your computer. But nowadays, if you want to look at pictures on Facebook, find directions on MapQuest, watch a video on YouTube, or sell furniture on Craigslist, all you really need is an internet connection. Because although these activities require you to use your PC, none of the content you are accessing or the applications you are running are actually stored on your computer. Instead, they're stored at a giant data center somewhere in the cloud. And you don't give any of it a second thought, just like you don't think twice about where the electricity is coming from when you plug an appliance into the wall. But cloud computing isn't going to just be a modern convenience. It's going to be an enormous industry. You see, everyone from individuals to multinational corporations can now simply tap into the cloud to get all the things they used to do to supply and maintain themselves. This will save some companies millions and make others billions. In fact, The Economist claims as computing moves online, the sources of power and money will increasingly be in enormous computing clouds. And David Hamilton of the Financial Post says this technology has the potential to shower billions in revenue on companies that embrace it. But they're not the only ones taking notice. Just have a look at a few of the headlines I recently came across while doing research on this sweeping trend. And Nicholas Carr, former executive editor of the Harvard Business Review, has even written an entire book on the subject titled The Big Switch. In it, he asserts the PC age is giving way to a new era, the utility age. And he goes on to make this bold prediction. Rendered obsolete, the traditional PC is replaced by a simple terminal, a thin client that's little more than a monitor hooked up to the internet. While that may sound far-fetched, in the corporate market, sales of these thin clients have been growing at over 20% per year, far outpacing that of PCs. And according to market research firm IDC, the US is now home to more than 7,000 data centers, just like the one constructed on the banks of the Columbia River in 2005. And the number of servers operating within these massive data centers is expected to grow to nearly 16 million by the end of 2010. That's 3 times as many as a decade ago. So you can see why The Economist says data centers have become as vital to the functioning of society as power stations. You see, the simple truth is that cloud computing is becoming as big a part of our everyday lives as cell phones or cable television. That's why I'm so eager to tell you all about the 3 companies that are leading the charge and look poised to rule the post-Microsoft world. One is the undisputed leader of the cloud computing pack. You may already know who I'm talking about, and you may have even guessed that is the real face behind Design LLC. But what you may not realize is that right now is the perfect time to get invested, despite what so many so-called experts in the financial media might be telling you. In fact, as I'll prove to you over the next few minutes, buying this tech juggernaut today is like buying Microsoft in 1990. Don't forget, even after the dot-com collapse and the recent market sell-off, every $10,000 invested in Microsoft back then would be worth over $400,000 today. Even a modest $3,000 investment would have grown into more than $120,000. Just imagine what you could do with that kind of money. Now, imagine being given a second chance to secure those kinds of profits. Well, guess what? This is your second chance. You see, like Microsoft in the early 1990s, Google is just getting started. It has already won the search engine war, set the standard for online advertising, and turned the company's name into a word tens of millions of people use daily. And now Google is fast becoming synonymous with the future of cloud computing. For starters, over 500,000 companies, including GE and Procter & Gamble, have already signed up for Google Apps. This grab bag of business applications can be purchased and run over the web for just $50 per year, and is just one of many Google products now giving Microsoft a run for its money. And considering that Google Apps cost just 1/10